Thank you, Chairman Langford. I am very pleased that finally, after a lot of planning and a lot of discussion, we're holding this hearing entitled Understanding the Millennial Perspective in Deciding to Pursue and Remain in Federal Employment. We did a lot of negotiating to get to that title. I would first like to say that I can appreciate that millennials are by no means an easy generation to quantify and to generalize. In fact, I had a whole discussion with my staff one morning about the difference between an older and a younger millennial, and I'm not sure we came to consensus, but I knew most of them were millennials. It's important to say that I have been looking forward to this hearing for some time because I think that it is only the beginning of the conversation. And when you look at the statistics that Chairman Langford just gave us, 31%. And one of the things that we learned during the Bakken boom was that when we didn't have federal employees on the ground, permits weren't issued, frustrating many of the companies that wanted to build infrastructure. We didn't see our grassland grazing associations be able to get grassland plans approved. And so it's not just about filling a bureaucratic slot. Many times these jobs are critically important to moving commerce forward in our state. So when we look at our hearing today, we are very fortunate to have OPM, DHS, NASA, and GAO testifying from their perspectives, but you're obviously not the only perspective, and I think at some point we desperately need to hear from the people that we're talking about, which are people who fall in this age category. So I appreciate that both OPM and the federal agencies have made tremendous strides in their recruitment and retention efforts. I'm looking forward to a spirited discussion today on how the following challenges affect millennial generations: compensation and benefits, career growth within federal agencies, the job application process in the federal government, and the intersection between engagement, creativity, and work culture. Most importantly, I feel it is important that the federal government connect with the millennial generation in a way that speaks to their needs and their desire to pursue mission-oriented careers, while also demonstrating that all careers in the federal government have, all these careers, what the federal government has to offer. So I'm looking forward, and I'm reminded of a story that's often told about someone walking through the halls of NASA, asking someone who was cleaning up from a day's work what he did, and he said, "I helped put men on the moon." And that's what we need, is we need that kind of connectivity to the mission that will make sure that everybody doesn't feel just like a cog, but part of a team. And so I really look forward to this hearing. Thank you so much for agreeing to attend. And Chairman Langford, I know that you, having completed the Senate business yesterday, you would love to be home with your family, but stayed so that we could do this hearing. So my personal thank you to you.
No, right there to do this.
Just, the folks are sitting in the back and there's a lot of interest. You're not supposed to sit at these press tables, but go ahead.
Right over there, too.
Over there. You want to, sorry, press. There's no one over there.
You can pull out a laptop and fake it.
Everybody's a member of the press today.
They can tweet it out.
Yeah. Mr. Goldenkopf, you got all these people here. Obviously, GAO has taken, very lengthy, detailed, almost scientific analysis of kind of where we're at here, taking a look at data, crunching the data. But you have 3 folks here who are part of that implementation, should read your report. I think your report is fascinating. What 3 things do you want them to understand from this report? And if you were going to do this in 5 years, how would you judge their, because that's what GAO does, they look at review, how would you judge their performance?
Well, first,
can you press the button?
First, I'll press the button. That's a great question, and I want to start by answering it with the story that you told at the very beginning about the custodian at the NASA facility, who, when asked what his job was, he said he's putting a man on the moon. The person who asked that question was John Kennedy. And I think that speaks so much to what we're trying to illustrate here today, which is the tone starts from the top, and whether it's at the presidential level or the heads of agencies, and we heard some of that today. Charlie Bolden at NASA, communicating with employees, connecting that mission, that line of sight between what they do every day on their job and the bigger picture that's going on at DHS as well. So that's important. I also want to commend everybody for the steps that are being taken today, and there's a lot more focus now on recruiting and retaining employees. OPM is taking some important steps in the right direction. But, you know, in doing so, data is important. I mean, GAO, we're data geeks, so we love this stuff, but these are important metrics of how you're doing. And so, for example, when we talk about things like whether it's time to hire, whatever metrics you use, it's important to use outcome metrics, and it's also important to use a whole suite of metrics. Time to hire, that's one important measure, but there are others. The quality of the candidate, it was also mentioned, the manager satisfaction, applicant satisfaction, diversity of the workforce, who are we getting? That's important as well. So I really want to focus, so that would be a second thing to say is the importance of data. And so those are two things right there, and I'll stop and just open it up for further questions.
Obviously, this is a complicated issue with a large workforce, and there has to be, as you explained to Senator Langford, we have additional obligations that may not be consistent with comparisons to Home Depot. Plus, we know that there are additional requirements that we have to make sure that employee is successful. But with that said, I'm still frustrated when you look at USA Jobs, because it seems like we're engaging in a lot of study, but the USA Jobs platform coming out is still burdensome, it's still cumbersome, it still is a turnoff. If that's the first impression that we make in the federal government with employments to a potential employee, it's not a really good first impression. And so where are we at with revamping that? Where are we at with better communication to the agencies in terms of what they need and want? And, you know, just not simply passing along that list of people who applied, but actually performing a service for the agencies so that they're in a better position when it comes time to make offers to do that more quickly.
So first off, we couldn't agree more that, you know, if USA Jobs is the face of federal hiring, it is important that we have an easy-to-use website that doesn't turn potential applicants off. Over about the past year, OPM has been very focused on iteratively transforming USA Jobs into a much more user-friendly and attractive site that supports a better job seeker experience. We have rolled out already a series of enhancements on using an agile approach where we roll out new enhancements about every 6 weeks. And then we look at our user satisfaction data and other metrics to determine whether those were the right things and whether we're on the right track. We've spent a great amount of effort talking to people, talking to millennials and other groups about what they would want to see in a USA Jobs, and have really focused intently on creating a good user.
And what have you learned, Mark?
Yeah, so what we've learned is that, I'll mention a couple of enhancements that I think are important. One of these is we have created a mobile-friendly website. So, we know increasingly folks are interested in being able to, pick up their phone or their digital device and do things on that. So we have created a website that enables them to do that. In addition to that, we have created a new profile dashboard where an individual, the first thing they're asked to do when they get to USA Jobs is to create a profile. And it includes things like, tell us a little bit about yourself, things like.
Kind of like Match.com, huh?
Well, it's, so what it actually does is by doing some of that work on the front end,
How would you know
it
that?
just sunk in now. So,
I couldn't resist.
so unlike Match.com, again, one of the other things we have is the creation of this profile, and it includes things like uploading certain documents, like your resume. So if you reach a point where you've now found a job that you want to apply for, you've already got your resume in there, and bingo, you can press a button and apply. Previously, folks would find, wow, I'm really interested in this job, now what do I do? And then they'd have to go to the trouble of figuring out, oh, is this where I load my resume and other documents?
Can I, one of the suggestions that I would have is, do you engage with guidance counselors in high schools and in college to train them on using this product? So if somebody is uncomfortable, so it's not done in a vacuum, young person who's going to be who's a civil engineer says, I'm interested in what opportunities are there, goes into the counseling office at a university, and the university is prepared to sit down and help them fill out that profile and upload the resume and do that review. Where are we at communicating with universities and high schools?
Yeah, absolutely, and that is a critical component of our outreach strategy. In a typical year, we will meet with roughly 150 colleges and universities to do workshops such as Find and Apply. How do you use USA Jobs as a tool to find a federal job?
And have you seen, when you look at this, going back to Mr. Goldenkopf's point, that it has to be data-driven. When you do that, do you notice that those places where universities and institutions of learning really engage, that you get better applicants, you get more applicants? Have you noticed that with your engagement with schools?
So what I will say is historically there have not been good measures to determine where are the applicants coming from. And one of the enhancements that we're creating in USA Jobs is to enable us to better track the source of applicants. We've created what we call the Agency Talent Portal, which is a place where an agency can go and specifically look at where applicants are coming from, whether it be people linking from Facebook or from certain job sites, or folks who hit USA Jobs from the get-go.
One of the things that thinking about this and understanding kind of how people engage in what they think, a lot of recruitment happens through friends and family. This is my job, I really like it, I think Joe would like it, or at least there might be an opportunity there. One of the things that I was thinking is, if let's say I see an opportunity at NASA, and I think this is great, I get a hold of my sister and say, I think you'd love this job. She may be reluctant to think about making the change, but if there were some way USA, based on that recommendation, USA Jobs could send her some kind of outreach saying, hey, I heard you might be a great person. I mean, I think we wait around for it to come to us, is my point. And we don't do enough to reach out. And if you talk to college recruiters, what they will tell you is their students frequently sign up in colleges that may not have the U.S. World News and World Report ranking, but because someone did outreach, this very top-notch student is in an institution because they felt like, hey, they really wanted me. They really made it possible for me to come. And that's one of the things I think when I hear this, it's all about incoming and not about outgoing and reaching out. And I know that would be hard to measure, but I think it's something you might want to add to a potential kind of recruitment tool.
Yep.
It's
a great suggestion.
Yeah, think if you're sitting there and all of a sudden out of the blue you're trying to decide what to do, and you get an email from someone saying, hey, I heard you're an aerospace graduate at UND. NASA's got some openings. You might want to consider looking at us. We'd love to have a visit with you about what that opportunity looks like. And go to your guidance counselor who we've trained, fill out this profile, and let's have a conversation. But I think, I think because the numbers are so large in federal service, that kind of strategic recruitment that you would see in a major law firm, that you would see in a elite kind of service, we don't see, but I think we should treat it that way.
I couldn't agree more. And, one of the things that I would submit is that USA Jobs is not directly a recruiting mechanism, but agencies can engage in lots of activities, and I know many of our folks at the table here do this, where they know where the talent pools are and how to strategically go after them. And what we're trying to do with USA Jobs is create kind of a central place where everybody can go. Once you find out about, hey, there's this place where you can go to find out about federal jobs, and it's USA Jobs, we want folks to have a good experience when they land there.
Yeah, I think we want people to feel like this is not them asking for a job, this is them getting recruited to a job. I think that's a significant kind of, it adds to the discussion about the mission. We're being recruited to help, launch the web. We're being recruited to help, protect the border. That someone wants me to help them do that. And I think that's a different than, boy, that's a job, may pay good benefits and be exciting for a while, but do they want me? Turn it over to Senator Carper for questions. Yeah. Ms. Bailey, I want to get back to you because, as you know, we have been doggedly determined to try and get, a full-fledged workforce on the northern border, whether it's in Portal or whether it's in Pembina or all of the places that are very remote on the northern border. It's been incredibly difficult, not only to recruit people up there, because obviously you can ask people to go and they go, but to retain folks. And a lot of that is quality of life. One of the things that we've experienced in economic development in rural areas is that we used to say when I was in state government, all you had to do was develop primary sector jobs. And if you had jobs, that would save the rural areas. Now we're finding out we have open primary sector jobs, good jobs in rural America. No one wants to live there. And so we have a very hard time in this age category convincing folks that they want to live in rural America. You operate in rural America. All across, I've been on the southern border, mainly in the very remote locations in Arizona. I've been up and down, in fact, took Senator Carper on an airplane, a helicopter run by Air and Marine, thank you very much, showing him the northern border. How do we, in this group, really address the concerns of the younger, millennials who would be coming in terms of recruitment into what we might say are less desirable areas? What tools do you need to do that?
I think we probably have the tools available. I think we just have to rethink some of our strategies. And so what I mean by that is I think too often we're applying Washington, D.C. or metropolitan type recruiting and retention strategies to an area that is completely different than this particular area. When I worked for the Defense Contract Management Agency, we ran into this same issue because we had some of the remote areas in which we were trying to do that. And one of the things that we successfully did, and I'd like to actually bring this idea to DHS as well, we started recruiting our interns and, our interns and our recent grads, we started recruiting them in cohorts. And we started placing them as cohorts into these rural communities so that they were together as a group. Because what happens is if you just take and let's just say a 25-year-old or a 20-year-old, and you plop them down into a middle of an environment in which it's completely unfamiliar to them, they don't have their parents, they don't have their family, they don't have their friends, and their co-workers are already married with their 2.5 kids and a dog, right? And so at the end of the day, when they're all headed home, the younger person just really didn't have anybody that was there to be with them. And so by creating these cohorts and actually putting them together, we helped them find housing in an area that was together. They then formed their own groups, right? They formed their own softball teams. They went to happy hour together. They did all the things together, but that's how we actually recruited them in, kept them together. We created mentors, which, by the way, we brought back alumni. I think this is another great idea. So the alumni that had retired, we created an alumni group, and then that group became kind of like mom and dad, if you will, over like the cohort, and it helped them kind of stabilize them, and they had somebody to turn to that wasn't necessarily their boss or their colleague, and it just created this more family environment.
So how would you effectuate that? How would you implement that in Border Patrol?
So in Border Patrol, and you know, we can work with them on this, but basically whenever we do a hiring, we would do, you know, hiring, and then we would look at the demographics, because we can't just hire for millennials, right? But when we hire for those, we'll look at the demographics of that, and where we find clusters of folks that are within the same age range, if you will, we will actively reach out to them and then help them, again, like I said, with finding the kind of housing that they might want to have. And
Can I add a nuance
outreach.
to that?
Sure.
Recruiting from the area, recruiting people who love to hunt and fish, that's their
Right.
value, that's their ethic. You know, connecting them with community people who
Right.
will be there. But I think sometimes you take someone from, you know, Chicago and say, here you are in Cavalier, North Dakota, and that is culture shock. And so I think taking a look at where you find these cohorts and who you recruit and how you recruit, taking a look at kind of what their backgrounds are, because you know the satisfaction level is going to be much higher if they're in a position or if they're in a living situation that looks very familiar.
Right, or if not familiar, it at least is an area in which they can kind of collaborate together and they can kind of get through it together. In other words, when we just think of them as individuals, then they're trying to struggle on their own, versus if they see themselves as part of a group, even within a foreign environment, I think that they just tend to like cluster together and have more interest.
Yeah, one of the concerns that I have, and I guess it would go to both you and Ms. Leo, is that we think that you're enormously talented. And we're glad you're here today, grateful that you're here today. We think sometimes the bureaucracy or the rigidity of the system, you know, you always have to be looking for workarounds. I think that takes up too much energy to look for workarounds. We want to know what are the embedded, you know, kind of problems that are in the system that need to be removed for you to do your job, kind of moving forward. And most of you know I have a bill that deals with flexible hire. We've been working very closely with OPM on how this would work and respect kind of the traditions of federal service, but also provide flexibility to the human service professionals, human capital professionals that are out there. So I'll ask you, Ms. Leo, what just like drives you crazy in doing your job? And you just say, if only this would go away, I would really be able to do my job much better.
Interesting question. And I think that the way I approach it, well, nothing drives me crazy in my job, so I just have to say that authentically, because I really love what I do, and I love being able to connect with the people at NASA, and they really love what they do. And I think that's our key to bringing people in, is we think about our recruitment strategy beginning with outreach in the community at large. And so our employees take the story to the American people, and we do that on a daily basis. Just before I was coming to.
But you got to give me something that might be just a irritant.
Well, I mean, there are, you know, certain things within our hiring authorities that are, you know, it's kind of rigid. I think even with the Pathways program, we have to be very creative with how we bring students, recent graduates and interns in, and we've met great success with that too. So I think even though there are very many challenges with our hiring process and the regulations that we have to follow, we have a lot of flexibilities, and that's one of the things we've been focusing on is what are the authorities that we're not using that are there at our disposal? So we have recently become an employer of national service, and we're recruiting returned Peace Corps volunteers and AmeriCorps Vista folks so that we can reach a different part of the population. So I think there are a lot of flexibilities. You just have to look broadly and cast a wide net and think about recruitment from outreach all the way to onboarding. And so even though there are some challenges with our hiring system in the federal government, there's a lot that's available to us that we can use.
If you're familiar with it and if you're willing to use those flexibilities.
Yes.
Yeah. Ms. Bailey, same question.
So I think that, well, I guess there's a couple of things. And I had the fortunate opportunity of working at OPM for 8 years, and so I kind of had the opportunity to see some of these things as they bubble up and that we were actually trying to fix. So number one thing for me is that I really do think that the HR community as a whole has really, over the years, it's been decimated to the point where we don't have the number of folks actually on board to do the work that they need to do. They're not well-trained anymore. We really actually need to start growing our own through like what I'll call an HR academy. I would love, love, love to see OPM get back in the business of actually providing HR training so that like whenever I was coming up in my 20s and I was an Army intern, you went to OPM and you got trained. And it was considered world-class training, and people actually recognized that and cared about that. So I would love to see an HR.
So the same thing that we know drives millennials was just training and
Right.
is what you need in the workforce.
Yes, absolutely. And so that is one of the things, making sure that, you know, both the hiring managers and the HR specialists understand this. We have way too many hiring authorities. There's, you know, everywhere you turn, there's yet a different way to hire somebody, whether it's competitive or it's accepted or whatever, and it gets ultra confusing for everyone. The next thing that I would really love to have is the ability to actually have these hiring events and use the direct hire authority. So one of the reasons we were so incredibly successful with our cyber hiring event is we used our direct hire authority, which OPM did give us. Actually, they gave the federal government, all the agencies, to hire information technology security specialists. But without that, I can only say we have 14,000 resumes that we are trying to rate, rank, apply the veterans preference, do everything that we need to do. In order to get through all of that takes weeks and weeks and weeks, because you really have to do that right. And so the advantage and the benefit of having a direct hire authority when you're having like a hiring event is that you can invite people in. You can do it virtually or you can do it in person, but you can actually get the resumes. And what we so successfully did is we had, in this case, the CIO community literally sitting in a room like this, CIO, HR, and security all together. So as we're looking at the resumes that were coming in and people were walking in, we actually could review those, hand them over to the CIO, who literally ran downstairs, found the hiring manager, interviewed them, walked them over to the security office, gave them a tentative job offer, fingerprinted them on the spot, and out the door they walked. And so that's how you can really effectively make some changes that would be just incredibly beneficial to us, is that when we have these specific hiring events.
And I would say there's no more critical place where you need to do that, because we absolutely need the best and the brightest in this terrific challenge that we have on cybersecurity. So, you know,
Exactly.
you could really make a case that that's a national security imperative, because you
Right.
don't want those same folks using those incredible skills to go do something else.
Right, and I'm not trying to suggest that we need to have these kind of things for every position out there, but I think we have to be judicious in which positions that we're actually using that kind of process for. So, you know, those are really probably two of the things that just eat up most of our time, is this thing called the rating and ranking process when you're trying to get through. Thousands of people do apply for our jobs.
Is there a way to streamline the rating and rank? Because I don't think anyone here would say we're interested in eliminating that, but is there a way to do it, you know, using data, using, you know, kind of a more structured, less labor-intensive kind of method?
And Mark might be able to help me out with this answer a little bit more, so, or at least correct me if I get out of bounds here. But I really think that probably one of the best ways might be to do it is to actually ramp up the assessment process on the front end, right? And so what I mean by that is actually have something that has a little bit more rigor in an automated way on that front end, so that what's spitting out on the back end isn't like tons of people that have to be manually reviewed, because that's the bottom line. But I think whenever we actually do a lot of that, it's expensive to do the assessments. It sometimes can irritate the applicants, you know, to think that they have to go through this assessment process on the front end before they're even interviewed, if you will. And so it's really trying to get that balance right. And Mark, I don't know if you have any thoughts on that too.
No, I mean, I think your comments are right on point. I think in many ways, we have come to rely on technology as kind of the fallback to do an assessment, but if you're not building a good assessment in the first place, then technology doesn't do anything but, streamline a bad process. OPM is continuing to put a lot of effort into a set of assessments that we call USA Hire, and these are professionally developed assessment tools that are available to agencies that they can use to help screen, in many cases, large quantities of applicants. And some of these assessments help get at soft skills, which are really hard to glean from a resume, even sometimes from an interview. But they are a very robust set of assessments that you can actually apply at scale and help, winnow down some of the volume.
Well, I'm really interested in what the barriers would be to using those kinds of tools to streamline this process, because I want to say this. If in 2019, 30% of the workforce that's working today is not working, everybody retires when they can retire, are you ready for that? Are you ready for it? I mean, that's a huge, huge challenge. I think that we all need to think about this not as a continuation of a process, but that succession planning for almost every major organization is a huge, this is not unique to the federal workforce. You see this in utility companies where I've sat on boards of directors talking about the average age of managers, never mind the average age of the maintenance worker who may have started with a plant who finished their career with the plant. And that's a lot of, number one, it's a lot of intellectual property that the federal government has that's walking out the door. And if we don't have succession planning, if we don't have the ability or the workforce in the HR area to actually do the work that we need to do to guarantee that we're hiring the best and brightest, that's a formula for failure in the important work that the federal government does. So are we ready? I guess, Mark, that's a question to you. Are we ready? If you can just imagine the worst case scenario, because we know a lot of people who are eligible to retire don't retire. But if you think worst case scenario, something happens and people just get fed up because they're tired of government shutting down and not knowing and, feeling like not underappreciated. Are we ready to fulfill the commitments that we've made in the federal government with the workforce?
Yeah, so I will say, to your point, one of the things that OPM is really driving hard on is strategic workforce planning. There are some agencies who use very good approaches and sophisticated approaches, and there are others who are not doing as good a job as they could be. It is critically important that we look at the composition of our workforce, evolving skill sets that we're going to need, what we need today, and looking at demographics of our workforce, and that we systematically and intentionally plan for that.
Well, it seems to me, and I want to turn back to Mr. Goldenkopf, that when we judge what we're doing right now, when we evaluate what we're doing, we've heard great creative ideas here. We've heard best practices. That's why both Angela and Lauren are here, because we think they represent great practices and great improvement. But how do we get other agencies to adopt these best practices? How do we best develop a metrics, some kind of evaluative tool that we would need to judge this from this committee, this subcommittee's perspective, so that we can, in fact, do the oversight that we need to do on federal workforce?
Well, that's a great question. You're absolutely right. There are a lot of best practices out there. The problem is, and there are agencies that are doing great things. You mentioned the agencies at this table. Problem is, it's inconsistent across the federal government. And so how can we level the playing field? And how can we share those best practices? And so one approach, there is the CHICO Council, which already exists. It's the Chief Human Capital Officers Council. And that was set up to do exactly this in part, to share some of these best practices.
But we need you to be our eyes and ears to help us with that oversight function, so that when we bring in an agency where we don't believe they're doing the right thing, we have the ability to evaluate that and to have that discussion.
Right,
And
well-
they know what they're going to be measured on.
And that's, where GAO can play an important role, and that's what we work with your committee on. And we go about that in a couple of ways. First, GAO has identified a series of best practices. We have our best practices or drivers of engagement, and so that's something that you can use and evaluate agencies against and say, to what extent are you implementing these drivers of engagement? We also issued a report recently, and we mentioned some of the barriers to more effective hiring. A key recommendation that we made to OPM was to basically scrub all the hiring authorities that are out there. In this report, we issued it earlier this year, there were 196,000 new appointments in 2014, but just 20 hiring authorities of the dozens out there. There's over 100 hiring authorities were used that year. Only 20 were used to make 90% of the hires. So there's a lot of hiring authorities basically going unused. It's a lot of tools in the toolkit that really begs the question, why aren't these tools being used? And so that's something that we have, one of the recommendations that we have made to OPM. So where I'm going with this is hold OPM accountable for implementing GAO's recommendations, these government-wide recommendations. OPM is doing some great things, but they need to do more. And one of them, as I said, is looking at the hiring authorities to determine, are they effective in meeting the needs of agencies? Effective in terms of meeting the needs of hiring managers, of applicants? Are they meeting the needs of the merit system? Another thing that we've done is another barrier is a classification system. Federal classification system was established in 1949, so it's a relic of something that is decades old. And it was, back then it was designed for workforce and workers of a different time or a different era. And we made some recommendations in there about the attributes of a modern and effective classification, flexibility, that sort of thing. By making changes to it, you might be able to give more flexibility in terms of pay, give more flexibility in terms of moving federal employees around, both in terms of within agencies and across agencies. So that's another thing that can be done.
And all of these things, going back to kind of the theme of this, all of these things in terms of removing the rigidity, making sure that people are using the flexibility and the hiring tools that they have, those are all things that it seems to me fit within recruiting the new federal workforce.
Exactly. And then a final thing in terms of actually getting down to specific metrics, GAO has put closing mission-critical skills gaps on our high-risk list. One of the recommendations that we've made to OPM in concert with the Chico Council is to develop a suite of metrics that agencies can use, a consistent set of metrics that something called HR stat, basically statistics for the human resource field. They exist, agencies are developing them. One of the issues that we found is that those metrics are inconsistent. So it's like, you're measuring and you're using the metric system, someone else is using inches, someone else is using furlongs. And so in terms of for your ability to oversee progress being made in improving the hiring process or whether agencies are addressing mission-critical skills gaps, without a common suite of metrics, you can't do that. So we're not saying that there should be one-size-fits-all. Agencies do need their own individual metrics, but there also should be something that agencies, a more cross-cutting set of metrics as well, and that's something that the Chico Council can consider.
Just in closing, I remember being hired as a young lawyer and being told I was a GS9. I had no idea what that meant, but it didn't sound very glamorous. It sounded pretty rigid, it sounded pretty bureaucratic, and it wasn't something, didn't really help my identity as kind of we move forward. And so I think that it's really important that we, in the work that you all do, start thinking about how we approach potential employees in a way that really makes them feel like, boy, this could be part of a mission I want to be part of. This could, I will be an individual. I will not be, a GS9 in some kind of classification system. And so I think that's one of the challenges that we have, but we don't have a lot of time. And I'm intrigued by the reclassification system. That's a big, big, big job. And that's why it's not getting done. If this were easy, it'd be done. But it may mean that because we have this transition coming, there's no better time. Because you are not, you're not changing someone's status or classification. You may be just looking at bringing people in a secondary level. But I think all of this rigidity leads to a diminished employment pool. And we need to figure that out. We need to really understand what it is that the new worker wants in the workplace, and we need to deliver that. And I think, NASA, and I think, with the progression that's happening at DHS, important job there. Cybersecurity, what a great success story that is. We need to populate those kinds of stories throughout the whole federal employment system. And so this discussion is by no means over. We are always interested on this committee, not playing the role of I gotcha. We are always interested in what can we do that will make your jobs easier, but going back to GAO, what do we need to do to guarantee that we have the ability to do the oversight? So that we can play our important role. Because there's no more important decision. There's no more important decision than the federal government makes than who they hire to serve the people. It's true in elections, and it's true when you're doing the hiring. And we take this role very seriously, this oversight role very seriously. So thank you all for coming. You guys have been great witnesses.